Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 465 How Prejudice Plagues the Heart, Part 5 The Impact of Blasphemy Within Your Heart. The podcast objectives are analyze how blasphemy manipulates opportunity, reveal the downfall of those who hurry to do evil, and analyze the danger of deception and lust. The only thing you were waiting for. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 313 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyze the impact of irreverence and the great danger that comes when there is a wall between your spiritual heart and your spiritual mind. Now, if you recall, irreverence is the focal degree of prejudice. Ergo, to understand the full impact of prejudice, we must now analyze the impact of its critical degree. Enter blasphemy. Along these lines, understanding the impact of blasphemy should not be too difficult. Just look at the diagram below. This diagram is an illustration of your heart at the conclusion of your battles with irreverence in times past when the battles were lost. And as you can clearly see, the only facet of your heart that has not been compromised is opportunity, i.e., the connection between your planning and execution zones. Now, along these lines, the opportunity is simply an opening for you to reap the poisonous fruit of unrighteousness which is in your heart. This is crucial because oftentimes the opportunity to commit an illicit act of sin does not exist. This is why the planning and execution zones within your heart are not connected like their counterparts are connected within your thought dimension. It is for the following reason, which I advise you to bookmark if you are led. The execution zone within your thought dimension does not translate into an action. Quite the contrary, it is the foundation for an intention that could potentially become an action if you decide within your heart to take that action. Now, this is not the case for your execution zone within your heart. Vis-a-vis, the output of this zone translates into an action. And yet, you will not be disposed to take that action without some degree of planning. For an example, think of the common criminal. Now, ask yourself the following question. Outside of crimes that are committed in the heat of passion, how many criminals commit crimes without investing some time in planning their crime? Trust me, even though a good majority of criminals will eventually get caught, most criminals and transgressors of law in general do some manner of planning before they commit their crimes. Why? It's because they don't want to get caught. Not only this, but oftentimes, if a criminal cannot come up with a good plan for their crime, they will abandon the crime altogether, and there will be no execution. Here again, it's because they cannot see an opportunity to commit the crime and get away with it. Now, if we are honest with ourselves, then most of us would have to admit that we have been in this predicament. To wit, the evil in our hearts was pushing us to commit an illicit act of sin to the point where it became our decision, our desire, and our intention. However, and this is a big however, the opportunity to transact the sin without getting caught never presented itself. Per the diagram below, there is no bridge between your planning and execution zones that would allow you to commit the sin and not get caught. And so, what did you do? Like many who came before us, you abandoned the transaction of sin until further notice. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say these three words, i.e., until further notice, are three of the deadliest words as it pertains to the models of intention and opportunity. Here is why. When you abandon the transaction of sin until further notice, you are leaving the transaction of sin on the table. And whatever sin you leave on the table will eventually be transacted, even if it is contrary to your treasure. Now, there are so many issues with this scenario that I will only address two. First of all, the fact that you can act against your treasure is a big red flag, one of the biggest of all red flags. Here is why. Every time you act contrary to your treasure, you diminish the value of your treasure. And if you continue to devalue your treasure, over time, it will become worthless. Not only this, but your heart will become so hard and so cold that you will fail to produce the fruit of meekness, kindness, mercy, and love. Now, if you think that's bad, the second scenario is just as bad, if not worse. Vis-a-vis, when you respond to any transaction of sin with the phrase, until further notice, that is Satan's cue. You fool, you've given him the wink and the nod. To wit, you told the great destroyer of souls that you're in to commit the sin. And true to his sadistic nature, he will do one of two things. Door number one, he will simply bypass the opportunity and push you over the edge. By definition, to push someone over the edge is to cause one to commit to doing something they had been considering or close to doing for a long time. Along these lines, the enemy will incite you to commit an illicit act of sin without any planning or natural opportunity. To wit, he will create an opportunity that does not exist. And because your resistance is so weak, he will effectively push you over the edge into transacting the sin. Procedurally speaking, these are the impulsive sins that men and women commit that typically have the greatest repercussions. For they are not only void of any planning or reason, but they are also void of any true appreciation for the consequences of the crime. Now, door number two, Satan will create an opportunity for you to transact the sin. Why? It's because you're not as impulsive as the other guy. To wit, you're down with the sin. You just don't want to get caught. Trust me, Satan gets it. He understands this model of depraved and delinquent thinking, and he appreciates your desire to be discreet. Ergo, he will create an opportunity for you to commit an illicit act of sin and not get caught. At least that is what he will tell you. Listen to me. He will make a way for you to cover the sin you desire to transact. At least that is what you will think. And that is why Satan will most certainly join forces with you. Trust me, he understands that kind of thinking because it came from him. And so he will deceive you into believing you have a golden opportunity to sin and no one has to know. You fool, even if no one knows, Yahuwah still knows. Ergo, even if you somehow succeed in hiding your sin from others, your sin will never be covered because nothing is hidden from Elohim. As I always say, your sin will find you out. Check the book. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, you should not think this scenario is somehow strange. Trust me, it is one of the most common occurrences within the sphere of men. And thus, I ask you to hear the conclusion of this matter. When you have reached this juncture in the progression of prejudice and contempt, your heart will be fixed on a path where it will be corrupted beyond recovery. And the only thing you were waiting for to manifest said corruption is an opportunity. And Satan came knocking. You will never know peace. Now, whether Satan creates an opportunity for you to sin, or if he bypasses the opportunity and pushes you over the edge, you must appreciate how both scenarios are acts of blasphemy. If you don't believe me, I ask you to consider the definition of blasphemy once more, please. By definition, blasphemy is the act of insulting or showing contempt for Elohim or the things of Elohim. Slander, railing, reproach, vilification, detraction, and or evil speaking against that which is divine. Now, per this definition, the question we should chiefly entertain is it not blasphemous, i.e., showing contempt for Elohim, when an individual runs to commit an illicit act of sin? Is it not blasphemous for a man or woman to plan out their sin and then conspire with Satan to violate the will of Elohim? Remember, we are not talking about the common man or woman and the earth. Quite the contrary. We are talking about individuals who call themselves believers, men and women who were called to serve the Most High Elohim. Now, let me tell you something. If you're the kind of person who runs to sin, who will burst onto the scene without waiting for an opportunity, you will never know peace. Quite the contrary. You, my friend, are setting yourself up for great ruin, and soon you will be deceased. Proverb 1:15-16 is revealing. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path, for their feet run to evil, and they hurry to shed blood. Isaiah 59:7-8. Their feet run to evil, and they hurry to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of wickedness. Wasting and ruin are in their highways. The way of peace they have not known, and there is no judgment in their ways. They have made crooked paths for themselves. Whoever treads in them shall not know peace. Colossians 3:8-15. But now also put off all these: displeasure, wrath, evil, blasphemy, filthy talk from your mouth. Since you have put off the old man with his practices and have put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge according to the likeness of him who created him. Therefore, as chosen ones of Elohim, set apart and beloved, put on compassion, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, patience. But above all these, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. And let the peace of Elohim rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be filled with thanks. The danger of deception and lust. Now, it should come as no surprise that those who rush to do evil will never know peace. The scriptures we have just read prove that peace does not exist outside of the way of holiness, i.e., the path to perfection, a path we can only travel if we love Elohim, and our love for him grows every day. This is why willful transgressors and blasphemers cannot walk in this way. And this is why there will be a steep price to pay. Now, if you think that's bad, let me tell you something. The latter form of blasphemy is even worse than the first. That is, the scenario where so called believers are too smart and too calculated to rush into sin. And so, what do? Alas, they team up with Satan, vis-a-vis, they conspire with him to plan the sin they desire to transact. Let's talk about it, shall we? Now, first things first, we know we are dealing with men and women who have some level of faith because there's often a struggle until the very end. This is one of the reasons why they don't rush headfirst into sin. Trust me, it's not just because they don't want to get caught. Quite the contrary. A large part of their delay is due to the small sliver of hope and honesty that is yet crying out, don't do it. And although that voice becomes more difficult to hear, the further you progress this sorted process, it can yet be heard until the very end. And it represents your only chance, your last chance to get off this train before it lands you far outside the boundaries of the Father's will. Now, James 1, 12 through 16 is revealing. Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been proved, he shall receive the crown of life, which the master has promised to those who love him. Let no one say, when he is enticed, I am enticed by Elohim, for Elohim is not enticed by evil matters, and he entices no one. But each one is enticed when he is drawn away by his own lust and trapped. Then, when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it has been accomplished, brings forth death. Do not go astray, my beloved brothers. Now, this passage is an illustration of the cycle of temptation, which we analyze in End Times 266, the sealing of the 144,000, part 2, which was posted on March 25th, 2024. I advise you to listen to this podcast when you can find the time. Now, in line with that podcast, you must appreciate how the cycle of temptation begins with enticement, which derives from some form of unrighteousness within your heart. Then, once you have been enticed and you fail to resist, you will be drawn away by the spirit of lust. As you would expect, this is a juncture where things start to get complicated and fast. Consider this, my friends, and be advised, and do not be led astray. The spirit of lust will always lead you into a trap. Always. Now, here lies the irony and the problem. To wit, true believers will not walk into a trap on purpose. Thus, we conclude the only way this is possible is if deception is involved. And it is. Trust me, deception is, to some degree, always involved. You can see this by observing the mountain of lawlessness to the right. Vis-a-vis, deception is the most pervasive degree of lawlessness, spanning every division, i.e., fallibility, instability, and debility. Ergo, deception is clearly at work at this juncture in our quest. Not only this, but when it is combined with lust, you will find yourself in dire straits. Here is why. Lust and deception are two of the more powerful degrees of lawlessness. And when these two poisons are taken together, the end results are always devastating. Now, this is clear to see when you consider the cycle of temptation. Vis-a-vis, all who are led astray by deception and lust will eventually become ensnared by the enemy. Listen to me. These individuals will be trapped and ensnared in an evil situation where they are depleted of their spiritual resistance and they are, for all intents and purposes, powerless to sin. This is why the next step in this disastrous cycle is, in fact, sin. For look, listen, it has been written, when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. To wit, once you have been deceived by lust, you cannot avoid the path of conception, for you are trapped. And if you cannot avoid the path of conception, you will transact sin. And if you transact sin, you are going to die. Now, the question of the hour is, how can you escape this process once you devolve into this cycle? The answer is sure, but it is one of the most difficult endeavors you will ever face in your quest. Vis-a-vis, you must escape the cycle of temptation, which is draped in deception before lust is conceived. And thus, the $1,000,000 question then is simply how? How do you escape the cycle of temptation once you have already begun to be deceived? The answer is sure, and it is only possible if you have initiated a reclamation process. That is, a process to break the process, to wit, a cycle to abridge the cycle. And this cycle must be governed by the powers of faith, obedience, virtue, and the fear of Elohim. Now, we have already analyzed faith, obedience, and virtue, and thus we will turn our attention to analyzing the fear of Elohim in the upcoming podcast. What you need to know now at this time is sure, and I will offer it as an inflection point. Those who progress to this phase of lawlessness are operating in deep-seated prejudice. These are men and women who are in full contempt of the Father's will, whose hearts are filled with blasphemy. All they need is an opportunity. And as you can see by the diagram below, they will blaspheme and their hearts will never be free. This is the impact of blasphemy and the great damage of prejudice. The war is lost, the damage is done. Selah. Now, here is the final word. Your life will be anything but a dream if you are given to blaspheme. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, again, blasphemy is a very serious matter. And if you would receive it, all the degrees of lawlessness we have analyzed thus far work together to cause you to do one thing above all others. That is, to blaspheme the Most High Elohim. Here lies the problem. And I have said this repeatedly during these lessons on prejudice. Vis-a-vis, many are blaspheming without knowing and or appreciating that they are doing it. And yet, they are doing it. And they will be judged accordingly. Whether you're the fool who runs to do evil or the fool who plots with the enemy to transact and cover his sins, you will be judged accordingly. Heretofore, I recommend, stay with me, for Elohim has given us an elixir for blasphemy. My dear friends, we have the antidote for every degree of prejudice. Yahuwah has given us the cure. It is by walking in the fear of Elohim, to wit, the primary application of virtue, a path you can follow to cleanse your heart of prejudice and to ensure your heart is always pure. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on all the lessons you have heard this week and ask the Father to give you clarity on anything you are struggling to receive. And if you are led, please feel free to reach out to me. You can fill out a form on our website and let us know what questions you have. And remember, the only question that can truly hurt you is the one you fail to ask. Last but not least, enjoy the upcoming Shabbat and the weekend, and be ready to get back at it next week as we continue to make our calling and election sure in pursuit of the precious and priceless seal of Elohim. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 465, How Prejudice Plagues the Heart, Part 5. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 470, A Fearless Nation of Fearful Men. I will post this podcast on Monday, May 12th, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.